When I walked into the brewery that afternoon, it was meant to be such a simple day, a small gathering, a quiet moment for my family, a chance for my 90-year-old aunt to sit with us, share a meal, and watch the people she loves laugh together the way families should. Welcome to Stories by Amy. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and liked my video. Now, let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. I had planned it carefully. I had even double-checked the reservation twice during the week because I knew how limited the low-top tables were. My aunt, with her gentle hands and her soft voice, couldn't sit at a high top. Her knees simply couldn't handle it. So when the brewery staff confirmed a low-top table was available and reserved under my name, I felt relieved. It seemed like everything would go smoothly. But life has a strange way of taking simple moments and turning them into memories you didn't expect. Some are beautiful, some are painful, and some, like the one I am about to share, stay with you because they reveal something about people, about entitlement, about patience, about what happens when kindness meets someone who refuses to see it. When I walked in, the first thing I saw was our table. It was right where the staff said it would be. A small low top tucked near the corner with just enough space for my aunt's walker and her gentle steps. I felt a wave of quiet relief. My husband walked toward the bar to check in and open our tab. I moved toward the table to start setting things down. My aunt's little cushion, the small bag of snacks she liked, the napkins I always carried. But before I could even pull out a chair, I noticed them. A large group, bigger than any I had seen that day, had taken over the high top and standing area next to our reserved space. At first, I thought nothing of it. Families gather everywhere, and the brewery often had a mix of people, from quiet couples to noisy groups. But this group was different. They were spread out, almost spilling into the walkway, with strollers and car seats in every corner. A wagon, big enough to carry half a nursery, sat parked so close to my table that one of its wheels was touching the leg of a chair. And right in the middle of it all was a woman who looked at me as if I had broken some unspoken rule by even approaching my own reservation. I felt her stare before I heard her voice. "I wanted that table," she said loudly, loud enough that anyone standing nearby could hear her. I froze for half a second. Her tone wasn't just disappointed, it was accusing. As if my presence at my own table was personally offensive to her, I didn't respond, not because I was scared, but because I was surprised. When someone speaks like that, your brain takes a moment to adjust. You try to understand, you try to reason, you try to believe that you misheard or misinterpreted the tone. But before I could gather a single thought, I heard another voice, someone from her group, maybe a friend, maybe a relative, I couldn't tell. They didn't even ask. The second woman said, ask for my own reservation." I stood still, holding my aunt's cushion in my hands, feeling that familiar mix of confusion and disbelief settle in my chest. The kind that makes you blink a few times, just to see if the moment changes or softens. But it didn't. The first woman kept staring. Her glare felt heavy, like she expected me to apologize for something I didn't even understand. Around her, several infants were scattered, one even crawling on the floor near the legs of my chair. The stroller wheels touched the edge of our table space. Their wagon blocked half the walkway. Everything about their group seemed to expand outward, as if they believed that the space naturally belonged to them simply because they needed more of it. I looked at the reservation sign on the table. My name, written clearly. My time slot, perfectly correct. The staff had prepared everything exactly as promised. Still, the woman stared as if the table had always belonged to her, and I had arrived only to take it away. She kept fuming, her expression tightened. Her voice lowered into sharp whispers, but her irritation was obvious. Every time I pulled out a chair or placed something down, I felt her eyes on me. And for a moment, just one small moment, I felt something I rarely felt in public spaces. I felt unwelcome at my own table. I could feel myself shrinking inward, trying to stay calm, trying to breathe the way people do when they remind themselves they did nothing wrong. I kept thinking of my aunt, of her slow walk, of how she would need a stable seat, of how much she looked forward to this small gathering. So I swallowed the discomfort. I ignored the glare. I set the cushion down. But the air around me, the tension, the unspoken claim, the disbelief that she truly thought this table belonged to her stuck with me. At that moment, I didn't know how far it would go. I didn't know how deep her entitlement ran. I didn't know that this quiet afternoon would turn into a lesson, a painful one, about what happens when people believe the world owes them more space than it actually does. But I would learn, slowly, quietly, and in a way I wouldn't forget. I think what bothered me most in those first few minutes was how quickly a peaceful moment could shift into something uneasy. I had walked in with a soft heart and a quiet plan, set up the table, get my aunt seated, greet everyone slowly as they arrived. But now, even before the gathering began, I felt as if I had stepped into a space where someone had already drawn invisible borders and expected me to respect them. I tried not to let it show. I reminded myself that this day was about my aunt. She was turning 90 soon, and she rarely left her house anymore. Her world had grown small over the last few years. Most days she sat in the living room chair she adored, the one by the window where the afternoon sun landed gently on her hands. She liked quiet places, simple meals, soft conversations. Whenever she came to an event, I felt responsible for her comfort. Not because she asked for it, she never did, but because I understood how delicate her movements had become. So I focused on that. I told myself, this is for her. This moment is bigger than the discomfort you feel. And that gave me strength. When my husband walked back from the bar with the receipt and our tab number, he noticed my expression right away. He always noticed things like that. He wasn't the type to react quickly or loudly. He had a very calm way of speaking, even when he was concerned. "Everything okay?" he asked gently. I didn't want to make a scene, so I kept my voice soft. "That group," I said quietly, nodding in their direction. "They seem upset that we're using the table." He glanced over, took in the sight of the strollers, the wagon, the crowded high top, and the woman still staring in our direction. Instead of frowning or commenting, he simply placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's our reservation," he said calmly. "They'll understand." But when I looked back, it was clear they didn't understand, or didn't want to. Still, I didn't want to dwell on their behavior. I wanted to focus on preparing for my aunt. I placed her cushion neatly on the chair closest to the aisle so she could sit without needing to step around anything. I set her small snack bag on the table and adjusted the napkins. Simple actions, quiet actions, things that made me feel grounded. A few minutes later, my cousin arrived. She walked in carrying a light sweater for her mother, my aunt, because older people always seem to feel cold before anyone else. When she saw the table, she smiled. She had been worried that my aunt might struggle with a high-top table, so I could see relief in her eyes. "This looks perfect," she said. "Thank you for arranging everything." It felt good to hear that. Even though I knew I didn't need thanks, her words softened the tension I had been holding in my chest. But just as she sat down, I heard the woman behind us again. A huff. A sigh. A loud, frustrated noise meant to be heard. I tried to ignore it. My cousin tried to ignore it. But sometimes, even when you don't react, the sound sneaks under your skin and settles there. My cousin followed my gaze when she noticed I was distracted. "Is everything all right?" she asked. I gave a small shrug. "I think they wanted this table, but it's reserved." "I know." She looked over her shoulder, saw the woman glaring, and let out a quiet breath. We didn't say anything else about it. Sometimes silence is easier than conflict. Sometimes you hope that if you don't respond, the moment will pass on its own. A few minutes later, my aunt arrived. I will never forget the way she walked into that brewery, slow, steady, holding onto her walker with both hands. Her steps were small but determined. She had always been that way. Even when age softened her body and slowed her pace, her spirit remained steady. She liked being independent, even when she needed help. She always tried first before asking. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Oh, sweetheart," she said in her gentle voice. "You picked a lovely place." I smiled, and the tension from the last 15 minutes melted just a little. Helping her sit down took time. She placed one hand on the table, steadied herself, and slowly lowered her body onto the cushioned chair. I held her elbow gently the whole time. But as she settled, I felt the eyes of the woman behind us again, sharp, impatient, disapproving. As if she couldn't believe we were truly taking the table she believed should have been hers. My aunt didn't notice. She never noticed things like that. Her world had become quieter with age. She didn't hear whispers the way she used to. She didn't see irritation in the faces of strangers. She lived inside moments, not around them. When she was finally seated, she smiled and looked around the room with genuine curiosity. "It's busy today," she said softly. "So many families." "Yeah," I replied gently. "A lot of people came out today." She took a slow breath, enjoying the atmosphere. She liked watching people. Even at her age, she found joy in observing life happening around her, children playing, couples talking, friends laughing. To her, every stranger carried a story. She once told me she liked to imagine what their lives were like, where they came from, what they loved, what made them smile. But today, she would become part of someone else's imagined story, one written not with kindness, but with entitlement. As more of our family arrived, the table filled slowly. Everyone moved gently around my aunt, mindful of her walker and her limited space. Even in small gatherings, she became the center of our movements, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned that respect simply by living 90 years with grace. But with each new arrival, the woman behind us seemed to grow more frustrated, more restless, more fixated on us. I could hear little pieces of her irritation, even though she wasn't speaking directly to me. "We could have used that table. They shouldn't let people hog the low tops. We have infants. We need space." Every sentence felt like a quiet slap, even though she wasn't addressing us at all. The strange part was that the brewery had plenty of space. Their group had taken over a large area, much bigger than our small table. They had the entire high top, the surrounding standing area, and half the walkway. They weren't short on room. They weren't crowded. They simply wanted something that wasn't theirs. And for the first time, I started to realize that this wasn't about a table. It wasn't about space. It wasn't about comfort. It was about entitlement, pure, unfiltered entitlement. The belief that they deserved more simply because they wanted more. That our reservation meant nothing because they were louder, bigger, or carrying more children. That their presence gave them ownership of everything around them. I could feel the tension shaping the atmosphere like a quiet fog, pressing in from the edges of the room. I glanced at my husband. He gave me a comforting look as if to say, "I know. I see it too." Still, we stayed calm. We stayed quiet. We didn't react. I kept reminding myself my aunt is here. This is her day. Nothing is more important than her comfort. When the server came over to greet us, she smiled and checked the reservation again, confirming everything was correct. "Let me know if you need anything," she said kindly. I noticed the entitled woman watching the interaction. I could almost feel her frustration spike when she heard the server say the word reservation. Maybe she expected the server to walk over to us and ask if we'd be willing to give up our table for her group. Maybe she believed her situation would override any rules or arrangements. Maybe she had walked in assuming that the world around her would adjust to her needs. But it didn't, not this time. As our server walked away, the woman let out a loud exhale, a sound that carried judgment. My aunt looked up from her menu and said gently, "Is it too noisy for me to hear you, dear?" "No," I replied softly. "You're fine." In that moment, I realized why this bothered me so deeply. It wasn't the table. It wasn't the glare. It wasn't even the comments. It was the idea that someone could look at my 90-year-old aunt and still believe she should be the one to stand or be forced into a high top because they believed their needs were greater. It was the idea that a group of adults with dozens of options could look at the most fragile person in the room and still feel wronged. That realization stayed with me. It softened my frustration and replaced it with something deeper: sadness for the way some people move through the world, believing everything is meant for them and them alone. And in a quiet way, I knew this moment would become a story I'd carry for a long time, not because of the conflict, but because of what it revealed about people. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The real tension hadn't even started yet. It began with little signs, small things that you feel before you fully understand. The woman and her group continued hovering around our area, even though they had more than enough space at their high top and the standing section. Their belongings, strollers, baby bags, jackets, seemed to spread outward every few minutes, inching closer and closer to our table. The wagon stayed parked almost against the back of one of our chairs, and whenever someone from their group walked by, they brushed against us without apology. Every time they squeezed past us, the woman let out a little sigh. Not loud enough to be considered rude on its own, but always just loud enough to be heard, loud enough to be felt. My aunt remained blissfully unaware. She sat with her hands folded over her small purse, smiling at my cousin and telling her about the flowers that had bloomed recently outside her window. She had no idea a stranger was quietly resenting her presence. In a way, I was grateful she didn't notice. She deserved peace, not tension, but the rest of us noticed. My husband, my cousin, my siblings who arrived one by one. Each of them gave me a small glance at some point. Those silent little looks families share when something is wrong, but no one wants to be the first to say it out loud. I kept repeating the same phrase in my head: "Stay calm. This is your aunt's day." But calmness can only carry you so far when someone keeps pushing at the borders of your space without saying a single direct word. The server returns about 15 minutes after my aunt settled in. Our server came back to check on us. She was a kind young woman with a warm smile, a smile that felt like a soft breeze through a tense room. "Just checking in," she said. "Has everyone had a chance to look at the menu?" We told her we needed a few more minutes. She nodded politely. But as she walked away, the entitled woman raised her voice again, loud enough for everyone in the area to hear. "Lucky them," she said. All comfortable at a low top while the rest of us have to stand. The way she said "lucky" carried bitterness. It felt personal, even though she didn't look directly at us. Someone from her group responded, "I don't know why they're even using that table. Look at all these babies." I felt my stomach tighten. Babies, children, infants. Yes, they had several with them. But that didn't change the fact that they hadn't made a reservation. It didn't change the fact that high tops and bar seating were the norm at this brewery, and low tops were limited. It didn't change the fact that they never even asked the staff for one. But entitlement has a strange way of rewriting reality. To them, our table looked like something they deserved simply because they existed with more noise, more bodies, and more needs. My husband leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "They're trying to make you feel guilty." I nodded slowly. "I know." "Don't let them," he said gently. "You did the right thing." I appreciated his calmness. He wasn't angry, he wasn't irritated, he just understood, and that made it easier to breathe. More family arrives as more family members joined us. The conflict became harder to ignore. My sister arrived next, carrying a small gift bag for my aunt. She greeted everyone warmly and then lowered her voice when she leaned near me. "What's going on over there?" she asked, glancing at the group. I took a soft breath. They wanted this table, but it was reserved. I know. Her eyes narrowed for a moment, not in aggression but in quiet defense. My sister was the type of person who remained gentle until someone crossed a line. And entitlement, especially when directed toward vulnerable people, always bothered her. But I shook my head lightly, signaling her not to get involved. Not yet. Not while my aunt was still settling. As she sat beside me, the woman behind us continued making her presence known through exaggerated movements, leaning, shifting, adjusting her stroller loudly, bumping the chair near my husband. Each action felt like a quiet attempt to remind us that she believed we were in her space. A small accident, it happened suddenly, too quickly for anyone to prevent it. One of the toddlers from their group, still unsteady on their feet, wandered away from the high top area. Their parent didn't notice right away because they were handing a baby bottle to someone else. The toddler toddled toward the walkway, tripped on the corner of the wagon, and fell forward, right at my aunt's feet. My aunt gasped softly. She wasn't hurt, but the sudden movement startled her. My cousin quickly reached down to help the little one up before the parent even realized what had happened. "Oh my goodness," my aunt whispered, her hand over her chest. "Is the child all right?" "The baby is fine," my cousin assured her, lifting the toddler and placing them gently upright. The parent finally rushed over, scooping the toddler up. "You need to watch your step, sweetheart," she said to the child, not even acknowledging that the fall happened because their wagon was blocking half the walkway. But the toddler incident brought new tension. The entitled woman turned sharply and glared at us as if we were the reason the child had fallen. "I told you this area was too crowded," she snapped to her group, but loud enough to be heard by everyone. I blinked, stunned. Too crowded because of us. Their wagon and strollers were the ones blocking the walkway. Their belongings were the reason the toddler tripped. We had arrived with one elderly aunt, not an entire playroom's worth of equipment. But entitlement never sees itself clearly. It only sees inconvenience and blames someone else for it. The whispering grows over the next 15 minutes. Their whispers grew sharper. "It's ridiculous, one old lady gets a whole table. We have kids, don't they care? People should be more considerate. They could easily sit at a high top. I can't believe they took the only low top left." That last one stung, not because it was rude, but because it reduced my aunt to something she wasn't, an inconvenience. She was one old lady. She was a human being with needs they refused to see. She was 90 years old and fragile. She deserved comfort just as much as any child, maybe even more. Every time I heard their whispers, I wanted to turn around and say something like, "We reserved this days ago. My aunt can't sit at a high top. You don't get to take someone else's table because you want it." But I didn't. I stayed quiet, not out of fear but out of respect for my aunt's peace. She didn't need conflict today. She needed calm. A moment with my aunt while the tension simmered behind me, I turned my focus back to my aunt. Her voice was soft, almost musical with age. "These places are different now," she said. "When I was young, gatherings were always at home or in parks, but I like this. It feels lively." I smiled gently. "I'm glad you like it." She looked around again, taking in the buzzing atmosphere. "So many babies," she said warmly. "It's nice to see young families." I felt something soften inside me when she said that. She wasn't bothered by the noise. She didn't see entitlement. She only saw life, new life, young life, growing life. Her heart was kinder than the world around us. "Do you want water first?" I asked her. She nodded, just a little. I poured her a small glass, careful not to fill it too much so it wouldn't be heavy. She took a sip and sighed contentedly. Moments like this were why I planned the gathering, why I reserved the table, why I stayed calm even when someone tried to push me toward irritation. My aunt mattered more than any tension, and I wasn't going to let someone else's entitlement ruin her day. The server gets involved eventually. The server noticed what was happening. Good servers see more than they say. They notice tension. They hear conversations. They understand when something feels off. She approached the group behind us with a polite smile. "Is everything all right over here?" she asked. Entitled woman spoke immediately. "We're fine," she said sharply. "We're just frustrated. We asked about that table earlier and now we're stuck at a high top with babies." The server kept her voice gentle. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but that table was reserved this afternoon." "Well, we didn't know that," the woman replied, as if that somehow changed the truth. The server nodded courteously. "Reservations are always marked. But if a low top opens later, I can keep an eye out for your group." The woman huffed. "We needed this one." I watched the server's expression shift in the slightest way, not rude, not dismissive, just grounded. "I understand," she replied calmly. "But this table was booked ahead of time. We have to honor that." The woman didn't respond. She just glared at the server, at us, at the space around her. The kind of glare someone gives when the world fails to revolve around them. When the server walked back toward the bar, she gave our table a small, reassuring nod. A silent message: "You're fine, don't worry about them." I appreciated that more than she knew. A longer silence after the server's conversation. Their group grew quieter for a bit. Not calm, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels temporary, like a breath held before another wave of irritation. We ordered our food. We settled into conversation. We tried to enjoy the moment, even though we could feel the woman's frustration lingering behind us like a shadow. My aunt told us about her childhood again, stories we had heard dozens of times but never grew tired of. She talked about her brothers, about the farm she grew up on, about the way the river near their house used to shimmer in the summer sun. We listened with soft smiles, cherishing her memories as if they were gifts she handed us with each carefully spoken word. But every few minutes, the woman shifted her stroller again, or adjusted her wagon, or moved her backpack closer to our chairs. Little reminders, little nudges, little signs she still felt wronged. The breaking point begins to form. I didn't know it then. But everything that had happened so far, the glares, the whispers, the irritation, was building toward a turning point. A moment that would change the tone of the entire afternoon. A moment when the quiet conflict would stop being quiet. The entitled woman wasn't finished. Not even close. And soon, she would step over a line I never expected her to cross. But that moment belonged to the next part of the story. The moment everything shifted from silent resentment to open confrontation. But that moment belonged to the next part of the story. The moment everything shifted from silent resentment to open confrontation. What I didn't realize, at least not right away, was that the groundwork for that moment was already being laid. The tension wasn't just simmering in their group, it was beginning to affect the environment around us in small, subtle ways. The energy at the brewery wasn't hostile, but it had pockets of discomfort now. Other guests glanced over occasionally, sensing an imbalance without knowing its source. People feel tension even when they don't understand it. It's human nature. And the longer the entitled woman lingered behind us, the more the atmosphere thickened, not enough to break anything, but enough to wrinkle the edges of an otherwise pleasant afternoon. My husband rubbed the back of my hand with his thumb, grounding me. The gesture was small, but it reminded me who I was responsible for in that moment. Not strangers, not their frustrations, not their impatience, just my family and especially my aunt. I inhaled slowly and exhaled even slower, hoping the tightness in my chest would ease. It did not. The subtle shift, it started with whispers again, but these were different. Less complaining, more plotting. Bits of conversation drifted over, sharper than before. "Someone needs to say something." Maybe they'll move if they realize how uncomfortable it is. They have space for 4, not 10 people. They shouldn't hog that kind of table. I froze at that one. Hog. As if we were selfish for using a table designed for a group, when we had, in fact, a group. As if we were the ones causing a problem. As if we hadn't reserved the space hours earlier. Entitlement turns logic upside down. I looked at my husband and he raised an eyebrow. "They're escalating," he murmured. "Yeah," I whispered back, "I hear it." But I still didn't react. Not yet. I was trying, truly trying to preserve the peace. A small, meaningful gesture just then, my little niece arrived. She was young, full of bright energy, and as she approached the table, she spotted my aunt and lit up like a little lamp. "Auntie, I brought you your favorite cookies." My aunt's eyes sparkled with delight as the child handed her a small bakery box tied with a ribbon. "Oh, sweetheart," my aunt said, kissing the girl's forehead. "You didn't have to do that," my niece giggled. "But I wanted to." The entire table melted a bit. Even I felt my chest loosen. Moments like these, pure, gentle moments, were the entire reason we were gathered. Family coming together, generational love, a child giving comfort to an elder. It created a softness that nothing else could replicate, but behind us I heard one of the women mutter, "Must be nice to have an entire table just for show." Show. As if we were staging some grand performance instead of celebrating one of the oldest members of our family. But I swallowed the irritation again. Not here. Not in front of my aunt. The bump that wasn't an accident a few minutes later, something else happened. The entitled woman walked past my husband, far too close. There was an entire open walkway to her right, yet she brushed directly against the back of his chair hard enough that the chair jolted. My husband's eyes opened slightly wider, though he stayed quiet. But she didn't stop. She didn't apologize, didn't slow down. Instead, she leaned over to someone in her group and whispered loudly enough for our side to hear, "People should have manners, it's so rude to block walkways." Walkways she blocked with strollers, wagons, bags, and a portable playpen-sized diaper bag. My sister leaned toward me. "Okay, that wasn't an accident." I forced a soft exhale. "I know." But inside, something shifted. The line between patience and tolerance began to blur. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted a fight, but because they were no longer just being rude. They were being physical, invading space, testing responses, pushing boundaries. My aunt's innocent concern a moment later, my aunt, sweet and unaware as always, leaned to me and asked quietly, "Dear, am I in someone's way?" Her question pierced me deeper than anything the strangers behind us had said. She wasn't concerned for herself. She was worried she was inconveniencing others. "No," I said firmly, gently holding her hand. "Not at all." "You're perfect right where you are," she nodded, relieved. But the way her eyes flickered toward the commotion made something inside me tighten further. Even she could sense something was off, despite her gentle nature. That alone was unacceptable. A brewing storm. Our drinks arrived. Water for my aunt. A light beer for my husband. Lemonade for my niece. Iced tea for me. We tried to settle back into a rhythm of conversation. But the group behind us kept moving. Shifting. Rearranging. Hovering. Every few minutes, they rolled the stroller back and forth behind my chair, so close that I could feel the vibration through the floor. They set down bags behind my husband, retrieved them, set them down again. It was as if they were trying to create movement, noise, irritation, any reason to provoke a reaction. My cousin leaned toward me and whispered, "They want us to snap." "I know," I whispered back. "And you're not going to." "No, good," she said softly. "For her." She nodded to my aunt. "For her," I repeated. The moment the brewery staff took notice, I didn't realize how many people had been watching until the manager eventually approached the area. He wasn't coming toward us directly, but his path was unmistakably deliberate. Managers can sense trouble like dogs can sense storms. He stood near the bar, scanning the room subtly. His gaze paused at the cluster of strollers and wagons behind us. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with awareness. He noticed the blocked walkway. He noticed the tightness of space. He noticed the frustration on their faces. He also noticed us sitting calmly, not causing problems, not complaining. The contrast was visible. The server whispered something to him quietly. He leaned in, nodded once, then looked back at the group. He didn't intervene yet, but the watching had begun. A quiet conversation with my husband. My husband leaned slightly toward me again. "You're doing great," he murmured. "I don't feel great," I admitted. His voice softened. "You're protecting her day, that's all that matters." I glanced at my aunt. She was gently folding the ribbon from her cookie box, smoothing it with careful fingers, smiling at my niece who was telling her a story about school. My throat tightened with all the love I had for her. No stranger was going to take this away. Another round of comments suddenly from behind us. "They're not even eating yet. Why do they need the table if they're not eating?" Another responded, "Exactly, it's disrespectful." I wanted to laugh or cry or maybe both. We weren't eating yet because the server hadn't taken our order, because we had only been seated for a short time, because normal people socialize before ordering. But in their mind, everything we did was wrong simply because we were doing it in a space they wanted. The final straw before the breaking point had happened subtly, like most things with them did. The entitled woman walked past my aunt's chair. Again, there was open space to her right. But instead of avoiding her, she curved inward, brushing against the back of my aunt's chair. My aunt startled, not dramatically but visibly. Her shoulders lifted with surprise, her hands tightening slightly around her purse. The woman kept walking without a single word. My sister's jaw clenched. My cousin's eyes flared. My husband sat up straighter. That was the moment, the split second, when patience stopped being peace and started being sacrifice. Not for me. Not for my husband. Not for any of the younger adults at the table, but for my aunt. A 90-year-old woman who had done nothing but sit politely, smile softly, and enjoy her family. Someone had brushed past her with disregard, and the entire table felt the shift. A collapsing calm. I placed a hand gently on my aunt's back. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes, dear," she said, forcing a smile, "just a little bump." Her voice was tender, too forgiving. She deserved better. Much, much better. I sat back in my chair, inhaled slowly, and held the breath for a long moment. The buzz of the brewery faded behind me. The low hum of other conversations dissolved. What replaced it was certainty. This wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Something was going to happen, not because we wanted it, but because they wouldn't let it go. And part 3 ended, not with confrontation, but with the unmistakable feeling that the storm was only seconds away. There are moments in life when you can feel a shift long before it actually happens. A tightening in the air, a pause that lingers too long, a sense that something is slowly inching toward a breaking point. That's exactly what the atmosphere felt like. For nearly an hour, the entitled woman and her group had hovered near us like a cloud that refused to drift away. Their whispers had faded and returned in waves. Their belongings had crept closer, surrounding the edges of our table like a silent claim on the space. And through it all, I had stayed calm, not because I had endless patience, but because my aunt deserved a peaceful afternoon. But sometimes peace is not something you choose. Sometimes it is something you must defend. And the breaking point arrived not because of words, but because of a single, careless action. The line she crossed. My aunt had just finished telling another story from her childhood. She spoke softly, her hands gesturing only a little, her eyes bright with memory. She was happy. That alone made the whole effort worth it. But as she reached for her glass of water, something unexpected happened. The entitled woman stepped backward quickly, sharply, without looking, and the handle of her oversized stroller swung wide and struck the back of my aunt's chair. The chair jolted. My aunt startled with a soft gasp, and her water sloshed slightly from the movement. Time slowed. The woman didn't turn to apologize. She didn't even check if someone had been hurt. Instead, she muttered loudly enough for us all to hear, "Maybe if this table wasn't taking up all the space, things wouldn't be so tight." And then she kept walking. It was not an accident anymore. It was a statement. My aunt gently placed her hand on the table, steadying herself. She wasn't physically hurt, but I saw something in her expression that made my chest tight. Surprise. Then confusion, then a hint of sadness. She looked at me with soft eyes and said quietly, Did she mean that for us?" Her voice trembled in a way that pierced straight through me. My aunt was one of the kindest people I knew. She didn't expect the world to cater to her age. She didn't assume people owed her anything. And the idea that she might be seen as a burden, that someone resented her presence, hurt her. I leaned in and gently touched her hand. "No," I whispered. "She's just upset about something else. You did nothing wrong." But inside me, something shifted. All the calm I had been holding onto tightened like a knot. All the patience that had kept me grounded felt thinner. And the protective part of me, the part that would have done anything to keep my aunt safe, stepped forward in my mind like a shadow rising. This was no longer about a table. This was no longer about whispers and sighs. This was about respect. And she had crossed a line she shouldn't have crossed. My husband reacts first. My husband noticed the hit before I said anything. He stood up, not abruptly, but with a slow, steady movement that carried weight. He turned toward the woman's group and said in a calm, even voice, "Excuse me." She kept walking, ignoring him. He repeated, slightly louder but still composed, "Excuse me, ma'am, you bumped into her chair." The woman finally turned around with a heavy sigh, like we were the ones inconveniencing her. "What now?" she asked. Her tone was sharp, impatient, almost theatrical. My husband didn't match her energy. He simply said, "You hit her chair. She's 90 years old. A simple sorry would be polite." For a moment, the woman's face softened, just slightly, just enough to make me think she might show a little humanity. But the softness vanished as quickly as it came. She folded her arms and replied, "It's crowded. Maybe she shouldn't sit right in the middle of everything." It felt like the room dropped 10 degrees. My reaction, I stood up quietly, not to argue, not to escalate, but because something instinctive rose inside me, a quiet strength, the kind you feel when someone hurts a person you love and your body moves before your mind even registers it. I stepped beside my aunt, keeping one hand lightly on her shoulder. "Please don't speak about her that way," I said softly. My voice wasn't loud, it wasn't sharp, it was steady, almost too steady. The woman scoffed. "I'm just saying it's not practical. We have small kids, we need the space more." I stared at her for a long moment, letting her words sink into the air around us. Then I spoke, gently but firmly. "We reserved this table for her days ago. We didn't take anything from you." She lifted her chin, defiant. "Well, nobody told us that." I shook my head once. "They did, the staff told you earlier when you asked." Her eyes narrowed defensively, deflection, denial, entitlement, always the same pattern. "It doesn't matter," she snapped. "We still need the space more. I have babies with me. Obviously, that should come first." She gestured at her group like they were a shield. And for the first time, I felt a wave of quiet sadness for her. Not anger, not frustration. Sadness, because she couldn't see beyond her own need to feel superior. Because she couldn't understand that someone else's comfort mattered too. Because she couldn't grasp that age deserves respect just as much as youth. My aunt speaks up, and then something unexpected happened. My aunt, my gentle, quiet, peace-loving aunt, lifted her eyes and spoke softly. "Dear," she said to the woman, her voice trembling but kind, "I am sorry if my being here makes things hard for you. I didn't mean to cause trouble." I felt my heart crack open. Because that was not her burden to carry. The woman glanced at her but said nothing. Not a word, not even a hint of acknowledgement. And that was the moment I realized this was not about space or tables or even children. This was about entitlement, plain and simple. The woman needed someone to absorb her frustration, and she chose us. More specifically, she chose my aunt, the easiest target in her eyes, and that was where I drew the line. The confrontation begins. I stepped forward just a little, not enough to startle my aunt, but enough to stand between her and the entitled woman's glare. "Please don't put this on her," I said in a calm, low voice. "She is not the problem here." The woman's eyebrows shot up dramatically. "Oh, so now I'm the problem." Her voice rose loud enough that several people nearby turned to look. My husband spoke evenly beside me. "You're making it one," the woman scoffed. "You all are being ridiculous. You could have sat anywhere. You don't need this table as much as we do." Her tone hardened further. "You're being selfish." The word hit like a slap. Selfish. Because I had made a reservation days in advance. Because my aunt couldn't physically climb onto a high stool. Because we were quietly minding our own business while she created a storm in her head. I exhaled softly and answered. "We came early. We followed the rules. We booked ahead. And we have just as much right to be here as anyone else." The woman stepped closer, too close, and pointed toward our table. "I don't care about your reservation," she snapped. "You see all these babies. We should be sitting comfortably, not standing around like we're invisible." My husband muttered under his breath, "Nobody is invisible. You're just not entitled to someone else's table." She heard him, and that was when she exploded. Her voice rises. "I am entitled to a safe place for my children," she yelled, her voice carrying across the brewery. "Do you not see how many babies we have?" Dozens of heads turned. People fell silent. The entire room seemed to pause. She gestured wildly at her group. "We need this table more than you," she shouted. "You can move. It wouldn't kill you." I felt her words like a cold blade. "Move, give up the space, give up the comfort, give up the care we planned for my aunt, because she wanted it." That was all it came down to. My aunt tries to stand in the middle of the chaos. My aunt did something that broke my heart. She tried to stand up. Her fragile hands gripped the edge of the table. Her legs trembled. She wasn't steady. She whispered, "I don't want to cause trouble. Maybe we should let them." "No," I said immediately, placing both hands gently on her shoulders to keep her seated. "No, Auntie, you're not getting up. You're not giving away your seat because someone else is being loud." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from old habits of politeness that had been conditioned into her long before I was born. "I don't want to upset anyone," she whispered. Her words cut deeper than anything the entitled woman had said, because she shouldn't have felt responsible for a stranger's cruelty. "I finally speak with strength." I turned back to the woman and spoke more firmly than I had all day. "You need to stop. Right now. You scared her." The woman blinked as if surprised someone dared set a boundary with her. "She's overreacting," the woman said dismissively. My voice sharpened, not in volume but in clarity. "She's 90 years old. She shouldn't have to feel threatened or uncomfortable because you want something that doesn't belong to you." I took a slow breath. "We're not moving. This table is ours. Sit with your group, take the high top you've been using, or wait for another table, but stop harassing us." For the first time, the woman didn't have an immediate comeback. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, then tightened, but she wasn't ready to back down, not yet. Entitled people rarely walk away quietly. She stepped forward again, her voice raised. "You're unbelievable. I have kids, and you're acting like you're the victims." She gestured furiously at her stroller. "And no one here even helped when my child fell, not one of you." My cousin stood up abruptly. "That's not true," she said. "I picked your child up." The woman ignored her completely. "You people are heartless. Heartless, for making a reservation, for honoring it, for refusing to surrender it to someone who didn't plan ahead. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so cruel." And just when her voice climbs higher, the manager arrives, but that moment, the moment her voice was echoing across the brewery, that was when the manager stepped in. I stood there for a moment, holding my breath without realizing it. The room felt strangely quiet, even though people were laughing, clinking glasses, and talking all around me. It was as if the situation had wrapped itself around me in a small bubble, muting everything else. I looked back at my aunt. She was smiling gently at my husband, asking him about his work week. She had no idea any of this was happening. She had no idea how much effort it took for me to make this day easy for her, simple for her, peaceful for her. She had no idea how close I had come to losing my calm over a woman I didn't even know. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe she didn't need to know. She already carried enough years, enough stories, enough weight from a lifetime of experiences. Today was supposed to be a soft day for her, a day to feel warm and included, a day to be surrounded by people who loved her. I reminded myself of that again. This is about her, not the woman, not the comments, not the strollers or the looks, so I took a slow breath and walked back to the table. My husband noticed the tension in my shoulders, even though I tried to hide it. He leaned closer and spoke quietly so only I could hear. "What happened?" "Nothing dramatic," I whispered back. "Just someone who wanted our table." He gave me a long look. He knew there was more. But instead of pushing, he nodded once, the way he does when he's telling me he trusts me to handle things my way. It was a small gesture, but it grounded me. As the food arrived, the warmth helped shift the mood. The plates looked colorful and welcoming, the smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables slowly dissolving the tightness in my chest. Everyone was chatting again, the way families do interrupted stories, half-finished jokes, little bursts of memory that spilled out whenever someone mentioned a place or a person from long ago. Even my aunt joined in, her voice soft but steady. "I'm so happy to be here," she said. "It's been a long time since I sat at a proper table with all of you." Hearing that made my eyes sting for a moment. This right here was the reason I didn't want to let the woman ruin anything. But life has a way of testing our patience twice when once isn't enough. Because just as I reached for my drink, the woman walked past our table again. This time she wasn't even trying to hide her frustration. She looked at me directly, then at my aunt, then back at the table, like she was taking inventory of things she believed she deserved more. She let out a small, annoyed laugh. A quiet, passive-aggressive scoff, just loud enough to be heard, just soft enough to appear accidental. And then, as if rehearsed, she muttered, "Unbelievable." My hands tightened around my glass, but I didn't look up. I didn't want her to pull me into something unnecessary. I didn't want my aunt to sense the tension either, but my husband heard it. He turned slowly, calmly, and then looked back at me. His eyes were steady. He wasn't angry, just present, just aware, just quietly protective in the way he always is. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence speaks louder than confrontation. The woman walked away, her group shifting farther from our table now, maybe because the staff had gently pushed them toward the area they were actually allowed to use. Watching them go felt like observing a passing storm cloud, not dangerous enough to destroy anything, but noticeable enough to cast a shadow for a moment. Once they were out of sight, I finally relaxed my fingers from around the glass. My cousin leaned over. "Don't let her get to you," she whispered. "Some people walk into the world believing it owes them everything." I sighed softly. "I know, it's just frustrating," she nodded. "Because you did the right thing, and somehow that made you the villain in her eyes. That was exactly it. And I wasn't sure why that bothered me as much as it did. Maybe because I try so hard to avoid conflict. Maybe because I want things to feel smooth and safe. Maybe because I hate being misunderstood. Maybe because I didn't want my intentions twisted into something selfish when I knew deeply that everything I did today was out of care. I looked back at my aunt, watching her laugh at a simple joke someone made about forgetting their glasses again. Her quiet joy was enough to steady me. It reminded me who I was doing this for. Not for the woman, not for anyone else in the room, just for her. The brewery lights softened as the sun began to set through the large windows. The room shifted into a warm, golden glow. People looked kinder in that light. Softer, more human. It made me think about the woman again, not with anger, but with curiosity. What made her feel entitled that way? Did she have a hard day? Was she overwhelmed with infants and exhaustion? Had she come expecting everything to go smoothly, only to find herself surrounded by chaos she didn't plan for? I didn't know her story. She didn't know mine. But maybe all of us walk around feeling a little tired inside, and sometimes that tiredness leaks out in ugly ways. That thought helped me let go of the last bit of tension I was carrying. My husband placed a gentle hand on my back. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine now," he smiled. "Good, because this food is amazing." I laughed, the sound soft and finally genuine, and as I took another bite, I felt a small wave of calm wash over me. The moment slowly faded. The frustration lost its weight, and the evening settled into something warm and steady again. The kind of evening I had hoped for all along. The evening kept unfolding in small, gentle waves. Every few minutes, someone shared a memory, or laughed softly, or leaned closer to hear my aunt speak. Those moments felt like tiny warm lights in the middle of everything. They made the earlier tension feel distant, almost like something that happened in another room, another time. But even though the woman had stepped away, I still caught a few glances from her group. Not all were hostile. Some looked more confused than annoyed, as if they had finally realized the table was reserved. A couple of them even looked a little embarrassed. It made me wonder if maybe not everyone in that group agreed with the way she behaved. Still, she kept her distance, though I could feel her presence lingering at the edge of the room, like a low hum of annoyance that refused to fade completely. But I kept focusing on my family. My aunt looked comfortable, truly comfortable. Her shoulders were relaxed, her breath steady, her hands resting lightly on the table as she enjoyed her food, and that meant everything to me. At one point, she reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You always take such good care of me," she said. Her voice was soft, but strong in the way only someone her age could be, quiet but full of meaning. I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. "I'm just happy you're here," I said. She smiled. "Me too, dear, me too." That tiny exchange was enough to dissolve the remaining frustration. It reminded me again why I had planned everything so carefully, why I had called ahead, why I had chosen this place, why I had reserved the low-top table even though most people prefer high tops at a brewery. It was never about convenience for me. It was about someone who mattered. Still, I kept catching myself replaying the entitled woman's tone in my head, not because I wanted to hold on to it, but because I didn't quite understand why it bothered me as much as it did. There was something piercing about being judged by someone who knew nothing about you, someone who saw only one moment and decided she deserved more. Maybe it was because she acted as if her presence alone outweighed the effort of planning something for an elderly relative. Maybe it was the assumption that she should receive something simply because she wanted it, or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it struck a nerve because it reminded me of all the small ways people overlook quiet efforts. People who arrive early, people who plan ahead, people who think about others before themselves, people who make things easier for someone who needs a little extra comfort. Sometimes those efforts go unseen. Sometimes they're questioned. Sometimes they're met with resentment instead of understanding. The thought drifted through my mind as I watched my aunt tap a small crumb of bread against her plate. She looked peaceful, and I felt myself soften again. A little later, one of my cousins leaned over and whispered, "Did you see that woman again?" I nodded slightly. "She walked by a few minutes ago." Still glaring, "Not as much," I said, "more like annoyed I exist." My cousin laughed quietly. "Well, she'll get over it." "I know," I said. But it was just so unnecessary. "People can't stand when the world doesn't bend for them," she said, "especially when they're used to it." Her words settled into me. They weren't harsh, just observant, gentle truth. I took a sip of my drink and glanced around the room again. The brewery had grown busier as the evening went on. Groups gathered near the bar, some in loud conversation, others quietly enjoying the music. Soft lights glowed against the wooden walls, giving the place a comfortable warmth. I liked being here. I liked the atmosphere. I liked that it felt alive without being overwhelming. It made the woman's attitude feel even more out of place. At one point, the staff member who had helped with my reservation walked past. She paused near our table and gave me a kind smile. "Everything okay here?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said. "Thank you again for your help." She leaned in a little, lowering her voice. "I hope no one bothered you about the table." Her tone told me she already knew. I hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Someone seemed upset." "I thought so," she said. "I overheard a little bit earlier. Don't worry, we've redirected them to the bar area. That table was yours, the reservation was clear." Her reassurance soothed something inside me. It wasn't just about being right, it was about being seen. We exchanged a grateful smile before she walked away. My husband watched the interaction, then raised an eyebrow slightly. "See," he said in a soft voice, "you weren't imagining anything." "No," I said, "I knew I was, it just felt heavy." He nodded thoughtfully. "Some moments stick to you more than others, even small ones." He was right, and his calm acceptance made me feel even more grounded. A while later, I noticed the woman stepping outside with her group. They gathered near the entrance, tending to the infants, rearranging bags and strollers, talking amongst themselves. I watched them through the window for a moment. Not out of spite, just observation. Something about them looked tired, maybe overwhelmed, maybe stretched thin from caring for so many little ones. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it made me realize something important. Her bad moment wasn't about me. It wasn't personal. It was just a moment. A moment where she wanted something to be easy, and it was. And she didn't know how to handle that disappointment quietly. Understanding that didn't make her attitude right, but it helped me let go of the tension I had been carrying. When I looked back at my aunt, she was smiling again, chatting with my cousin about the days when they were young and active. She looked alive in a way she didn't always look anymore. And that was what mattered. The person who cared most about this table was seated right in front of me, and she was happy, comfortable, included, safe. I felt a soft breath leave my chest, almost like a silent release. Maybe I had been holding that breath since the moment the woman said, "I wanted that table." But now I felt lighter. The shadows of the earlier conflict were fading into the background. The warmth of family filled the space instead, wrapping around me the way late afternoon sunlight wraps around a quiet room. Nothing had to be perfect. Nothing had to be smooth, it just had to be real. And this moment, this gathering felt real in the best way. As everyone continued their small conversations, I sat back for a moment, taking it all in. The dim lights, the soft music, the gentle laughter, the familiar faces, the quiet joy on my aunt's face. This was what the day was meant to be. And no entitled glare could take that away. The evening had finally begun to settle. The noise of the brewery mellowed into a comfortable hum, blending with the soft music and the sounds of clinking glasses. My aunt was finishing the last few bites of her meal, and there was this delicate piece wrapped around our table, the kind that feels earned after an uneasy start. But peace never stays untouched for long, not when there are unresolved threads hanging in the air. And even though I didn't realize it at the time, those threads were slowly tightening, pulling everyone toward the moment where the entire situation would finally snap into clarity. The walk toward the restroom it began with something simple, a restroom break. My aunt whispered to me, "Dear, could you walk me to the restroom, just in case?" "Of course," I said. My husband stood as well, ready to help, but my aunt shook her head politely. "No, no, let her take me. I'm steady enough." He smiled and sat back down. I helped her rise slowly from her seat. Her hand, soft and light, rested on my arm, and we made our way toward the hallway near the back of the brewery. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit, and surprisingly quiet after the noise of the main room. My aunt walked carefully, leaning just enough to use me as her balance. But halfway down the hall, I noticed someone leaning against the wall near the restrooms. It was her, the entitled woman. She was scrolling through her phone, one foot pressed against the wall behind her, jaw tight, shoulders tense. Her entire posture radiated irritation, the same simmering annoyance she had shown earlier. For a brief second, I hoped she wouldn't notice us, but she did. Her eyes lifted, and the moment they landed on my aunt and me walking toward her, something hardened in her expression. My aunt didn't see her. She was focused on the floor, careful with her steps. But I felt the shift in the air, that silent hostility people give off when they want you to know they're upset but don't want to be direct about it. As we approached, the woman adjusted her position slightly, but not to give us space. If anything, she angled her body in a way that forced me to maneuver my aunt around her. It felt intentional, like she wanted us to feel small for taking up space. My aunt whispered, "Almost there," unaware of the tension brewing inches away. When we reached the restroom door, I helped her inside and waited in the hall. The woman stood only a few feet from me. The silence between us wasn't neutral, it was charged. I didn't want a confrontation, I didn't want a scene. All I wanted was to keep my aunt comfortable. But sometimes people don't let you choose peace. The first words she spoke without looking at me. "You know," she said, her voice sharp but quiet, "there were other tables." I blinked slowly, deliberately, before answering. "It's reserved," she scoffed, "so you keep saying." I felt my heartbeat pick up just slightly, not from fear, from disbelief. "We reserved it ahead of time," I repeated gently, keeping my tone calm. "My aunt can't sit at high tops." She crossed her arms. "Well, you could have said something earlier instead of acting like we were bothering you." I exhaled through my nose, grounding myself. "You were hovering around us," I said. "It made my family uncomfortable." Her head snapped up then, eyes narrowing. "Oh, so now it's our fault your family took the last low top." I didn't answer right away. I held her gaze, not aggressively, just steadily. "You know the table wasn't yours," I said. "The staff told you that." She straightened from the wall, irritation spilling through her voice. "You don't get to make us feel like we're wrong for wanting a safe place for our kids." I paused, then spoke with even more gentleness. "No one said you were wrong for wanting comfort," I said. "You took it out on the wrong people." That struck something in her. Her jaw shifted. Her nostrils flared, but before she could reply, my aunt opened the restroom door. She stepped out slowly, and I moved to support her. The woman watched us, and suddenly something in her expression flickered. Not fully softening, but changing, recognizing, recalculating. Maybe she finally realized my aunt wasn't just some old lady. She was elderly. She was fragile. She was someone who needed that table. But pride is a stubborn thing. She didn't apologize, she didn't step aside, she didn't soften, she just turned her face slightly, pretending to look at something else as we walked past her. It wasn't grace, it wasn't kindness, but it was distance. And distance was enough. Returning to the table when we reached the table, my husband looked up immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said softly. "We're fine." But he could tell there was more to the story. His eyes lingered on me with a silent question. I shook my head slightly. "Later. Not now." My aunt settled back into her seat, smiling as she resumed her conversation with my cousin. I watched her for a moment, letting the tension from the hallway fade, but the woman's words still lingered in my mind. "You don't get to make us feel like we're wrong." It wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't understand. Empathy isn't a competition. Comfort isn't a limited resource. Respect doesn't cost anything. And entitlement masquerading as protecting my kids isn't noble, it's selfishness wrapped in justification. Still, I didn't want to dwell on it. There were more important things in front of me. My aunt's soft laughter, the warm glow of the lights, the gentle clinking of glasses, the small conversations that knit us together. Life was happening here, not in the irritation someone else tried to hand me. The unexpected apology, we were nearly done eating when I noticed the woman again. She was back in the main dining area, standing with her group as they prepared to leave. Her kids were bundled up, her bags gathered, her stroller loaded. For a moment, she just stood there, staring in our direction. Her eyes flicked to my aunt, then to me, then back to my aunt, and for the briefest second, something passed over her expression. Not softness exactly, not regret, but recognition. Recognition that she had misjudged us, that she had lashed out without knowing the full story, that she had let her frustration become misdirected resentment. She didn't walk over, she didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't offer any olive branch, but she did give a small nod. A tiny, quiet nod, barely visible before turning away. It wasn't enough to erase the earlier tension, but it was enough to close it. And honestly, sometimes closure isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't arrive in an apology or a conversation. Sometimes it comes in the form of someone choosing not to escalate, not to glare again, not to push the situation further. Sometimes closure is simply a moment that says, "We're done here." And that small nod, that fragile, almost apology was exactly that. The final moments as her group filtered out the door, my aunt leaned toward me and whispered, "Are they leaving?" "Yes," I said, "they're heading out." She smiled gently. "Good." It's quieter now. I let out a soft laugh, not mocking, not bitter, just relieved. "Yes," I said, "much quieter." My husband placed his hand on my back, offering support without saying a word. That gentle gesture, simple and solid, grounded me. My siblings began clearing some of the wrappers and napkins. My cousin pulled her chair closer to my aunt to help her finish the last sip of her drink. And for the first time all evening, I felt completely settled. Not because the tension was gone, but because the moment no longer belonged to conflict. It belonged to family, to presence, to gratitude, to the quiet realization that I had done the right thing even when someone else made me question it. The last words from my aunt as we prepared to leave, my aunt reached for my hand again. She squeezed it softly and said, "This was one of the nicest afternoons I've had in a long time." My throat tightened. Not because of the drama, not because of the conflict, but because she meant it. "This meant a lot to me," she continued. "To sit with all of you, to feel included, to have a place where I could rest. Thank you for making it happen." I felt emotion rise behind my ribs. "You deserve it," I whispered. She smiled in that tender, aging way that turns the heart to a warm ache. "And you," she said, "deserve peace. Don't worry about other people's noise. You did right." Her words felt like the closing chapter of the day, the perfect resolution I didn't know I needed. Because sometimes the most meaningful validation comes not from strangers, not from staff, not even from family, but from the one person you planned the whole day for. Her affirmations settled everything. The tension, the frustration, the doubt, the heaviness, gone. All that remained was gratitude, pure and simple. Walking into the evening, we helped my aunt into the car as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The air felt cool and steady, carrying the faint scent of food and the quiet sounds of the brewery behind us. As my husband closed the car door gently behind her, he looked at me and said, "You handled everything beautifully today." I let out a soft breath. "Thank you," I said. It wasn't what I expected." He nodded. "It never is, but you kept calm, and you protected her comfort. That's what matters." And as we drove away, watching the brewery fade into the background, I realized something. The day hadn't been perfect. It hadn't been smooth. It hadn't been free of tension, but it had been meaningful. And sometimes meaning matters more than ease. Sometimes the most important stories come from the moments that test us gently, not with anger or shouting, but with quiet resistance that asks, will you choose compassion anyway? And I did. Not because I'm perfect. Not because I'm patient, but because my aunt was worth it. And in the end, that turned the entire day into a memory not of conflict but of love. The drive home felt peaceful in a way that surprised me. For hours, I had carried the weight of other people's frustration, the whispers, the glares, the quiet judgment that tried to follow our day like a shadow. But now, sitting in the passenger seat with the window cracked open and the evening air drifting in, I felt something loosen inside me. My aunt sat in the back seat, resting quietly. Her breathing was soft, steady, almost rhythmic. Every now and then she would murmur a memory or comment on the colors of the sunset or ask if we had enjoyed ourselves. Her voice was gentle, always gentle, and hearing it helped everything settle into perspective. The truth was simple: the day had been worth it. When we reached her home, my husband helped her out of the car while I walked ahead to unlock the door. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm, golden glow across the small entryway. It felt like the world itself was exhaling, letting go of the tension the day had carried. Inside, I helped my aunt out of her coat and guided her to her favorite armchair. She sat with a slow sigh, her hands folding neatly in her lap. "Thank you again," she said quietly, looking up at me with those wise, aging eyes. "For today, and for staying calm." I knelt beside her, taking her hand. "You don't have to thank me," she smiled. "I know, but I want to." Her hand was cold, fragile, but steady. She squeezed my fingers with a softness that held more meaning than anything the woman at the brewery could have said. And in that moment, I realized something important. The real story of the day wasn't about entitlement. It wasn't about discomfort. It wasn't about someone else's anger. It was about love. It was about choosing kindness. It was about showing up for the people who raised us, supported us, and shaped us. We talked a little longer before I kissed her forehead and wished her good night. As we walked out, she waved at us from her chair, her smile warm and unmistakably grateful. When we got back in the car, the night sky was calm and open. My husband reached over and took my hand. "You look lighter," he said. "I feel lighter," I replied. And I did. The conflict no longer mattered. The whispers were already fading. The tension had dissolved the moment my aunt said she felt cared for. As we drove away from her home, I watched the lights inside her house grow smaller in the rearview mirror. There was a moment, just a quiet, almost invisible moment, where I felt something shift inside me. A quiet lesson. A reminder that not every day will go smoothly. Not every person will behave kindly. Not every situation will be fair or comfortable. But we still get to choose how we move through the world. We still get to choose patience over anger, grace over pride, peace over conflict. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is to hold our calm not for ourselves, but for the people who need us to show up gently. I thought about my aunt's soft smile, about her steady hand on my arm, about the warmth in her voice when she told me the day meant a lot to her. That was the real story. That was the real ending. Everything else was just noise. By the time we reached home, I felt grateful. Not for the conflict, but for the clarity it offered. For the reminder that empathy is not weakness. For the chance to protect someone who once protected me. And as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I found myself whispering a simple thought. Some days challenge you, but some days teach you. This day had done both. And even with the discomfort, even with the tension, even with the entitled stranger pushing at the edges of our peace, I would choose it again, because it gave my aunt joy. And that made everything worth it. Thanks for listening. If you like this story, please like, share, and please subscribe my channel for support me.